Good morning. My name is Pete Fuller, running for House District 31, covering Jackson County, with against the incumbent, Mr. Tommy Benton. Now that we are past primaries, and I've got a fun video here to talk to you and talk about this morning because the local radio station here, it's in Commerce. They they love me for some reason, and I just wanted to touch base here because I don't make a point of listening to it. In the past, I knew it was there. I'd hear about it from time to time, but I've got better things to do with my day, especially when it correlates with a lot of times I'm actually at the office during normal days and not able to sit there and just listen. But now that we're doing elections, I probably should monitor local media, and there's not a lot in Jackson County that's local. So I turned this on because I also have people text me like, "Hey, they're talking about you, this, that, and the other." So I get up and I hit the voice memo thing on the phone, or actually I did it on the computer this time, just to catch what in the world's going on. And I was kind of listening to it as it was going, and I made the mistake of, well, first of all, I'm not encouraging you to listen to the whole show yourself. I'll post the full audio I recorded, which I'm sure the radio station will appreciate too, because they had a power outage and apparently it won't be rebroadcast. So this may be the only recording of this show that exists. But for the first almost hour, I think they were discussing elections, both local and state. And the local elections, there's some issues with the local election board with some hostility, I guess, between some board members. And this was predicted when the board went to a five-member board. Um, yeah, just some backstory on the Jackson County Election Board. It used to be a three-member board, three people, all appointed by the local Superior Court judge. Um, Mr. Ponchi Beck died in a couple of years. Who had been the longtime elections board chair. He'd been there for probably 20 years, a long time. If you go up to elections board in Jackson County now, it's the Ponchi Beck Election Center. Um, but after he died right before the 2018 election, and he died, and a replacement needed to be found before the actual election. The Superior Court judge here looked all over the county for the best person to choose for this position, and somehow found Ron Johnson, Republican chair Ron Johnson. Um, and Ron uh, resigned from the local Democratic Party as a local Republican Party as the chair that morning, and was sworn in as Board of Elections chair that afternoon. Um, Here's the thing. Ron only served about 6 months because Ron couldn't follow the rules. This was supposed to be a nonpartisan position at this time. This was three nonpartisan members that were appointed. And Ron didn't resign from the state party. He was still chair of some one of their positions at the Republican state. I don't know their infrastructure, but he was something there. And he kept saying that he wasn't, but he would not sign anything that actually put in on paper that he was not, didn't have that position. It ended up resigning himself. So the first part of this show, so keep that in mind as a backstory. Second part, these two guys start off this show, and I'm not going to play all 20 minutes of them pontificating on this because they sit there and talk about different ways that the Fulton County Elections Board. Now, Fulton County in a lot of the metro areas had some horrific issues with their voting. And you saw huge lines in a lot of places that are mostly would produce Democrat votes, to be honest. And these two guys keep saying, oh, this Democrat county was trying to suppress votes in Republican areas of these counties. I can go back and show you pictures of the lines in the affluent parts of these counties versus the poor parts of these counties, and they are night and day stories. It's actually the opposite of what they're saying here. But they keep going on about, oh, this is how the elections people there are just trying to suppress Republican votes. And the whole time you're listening to this, what you have to keep in mind is this man had been appointed and was part of the Jackson County Elections Board. He was the chair of it. And what you have to do when you listen to these guys talk is realize that they are full of projection. Okay? They are full of projection. Basically, they are telling you what they would do if it was them, because they're spouting off the worst case scenario that someone could do to them. And they've internalized that this is what we need to do because these guys are going to do that to us. Whether or not that's true or not, it's not true. So I made the mistake of trying to correct them because I knew that Josh McLaren is a representative out of Fulton County. He had introduced a bill just the day before looking to reconstitute the Fulton County Elections Board because Fulton County elections have been an issue for a long time. And these guys are complaining about Democrat-run counties having bad elections. There is nobody that is more enraged, infuriated, frustrated than metro area Democrats that their elections suck so bad. Because those are when people are told they need to stand in line for 3 or 4 hours at least in order to vote. That is a privilege not everybody has to be able to wait that long. A lot of people physically aren't able to do that, especially if you're older or something, disability. If you have to work, if you have other things in your life that you like to do, especially when elections in this county, which tend to produce a lot more Republican votes, I've not heard of a wait time in years that has been more than 45 minutes on the very, very busiest days. Most days, I've never had to wait more than 2 minutes, like at most, on any elections because I usually go early. This year, I voted absentee from my house. Granted, it probably took several weeks because I'm lazy and the ballot sat here for a week or so. But yeah, and I would really encourage folks in these metro areas to take advantage of that as well because it keeps you from standing in line for hours. But at the same time, this is where the state screwed up. The state was nice enough to send out the nice absentee ballot request forms, which these guys also get perpetually confused about being actual ballots. No, they were request forms. And the state didn't talk to any of the elections folks or give them any warning that they were really going to do this and include at the top the personal email address of the election supervisors. So here, I'm an IT guy. When I saw that on that ballot certificate, I was like, oh God, that is going to crash a lot of email servers when you've got a ton of people shooting in pictures that are like a meg or so a piece to just a inbox of a random county government official that's probably got a quote on it that probably, yeah, and that's exactly what happened in Forsyth, in Fulton, and DeKalb, a lot of these places. And what it seems like is that also there are a lot of people that sent that in expecting a ballot to come to them, and the ballot never came. So a lot of the issues you see in these metro counties too is people that had requested an absentee ballot never got it, and so ended up having to go to the polling place on their own. Back to the original story. They got this wrong in about 15 different ways. And I'm like, guys, there are efforts to fix this because Democrats don't want to suppress votes in Fulton County. They don't. And I sent them a link to the bill because basically it's asking for the Fulton County Elections Board to be redone so they can actually maybe make some progress because this has been a perpetual thing for as long as I've been paying attention to elections in Georgia. Fulton County, the big metro counties, always have issues with their voting. They want to fix it. So let's ride this little train and see where it goes, okay? Because I sent him this bill.
I got our Democrat chair.
Yeah.
Pete Fuller is listening.
Good morning,
but
sir.
Obviously, he doesn't really listen.
Okay.
Because what did we say about DeKalb County? The vote that they would suppress.
Yeah.
The Dunwoody vote.
That's right, Dunwoody.
Which is all mostly 99% Republican.
Right, yeah. And he disagreed with that, did he?
No, he said, why the hell would Dems want to suppress their own voters in its Democrat-run county?
Well, it's not the county. It's the city of
district.
Glenwood.
Nancy Jester is the county commissioner there, and she's a diehard conservative Republican, and they would love to suppress that vote.
Well, and that's what's happening that was what the whole scenario was that we talked about, was the fact that any zip code within a county can all of a sudden disappear if it's heavy one way or the other.
Let's pause this right here to mention that you got Craig Fisher here now basically implicating the Postal Service in massive voter fraud and voter suppression. That's a pretty major accusation to be making. Just throws it out there because, that's obviously what could happen. Is there any evidence of this? No, there's no evidence at all, but it's scary.
And he disagreed with that, did he?
No, he said, why the hell would Dems want to suppress their own voters in its Democrat-run county?
Well, it's not the county. It's the city of
district.
Glenwood.
Nancy Jester is the county commissioner there, and she's a conservative. And they would love to suppress.
And that's what's happening that was what the whole scenario was that we talked about, was the code within a county can all of a sudden disappear if it's heavy one way or the other.
So Craig's cool
but of
with
course,
the post office suppressing votes.
The Democrats heard what he wanted to hear, and you'll hear more about that now. That that Ron Johnson said Democrats are going to cut Democrat votes. That's absolutely not what was said. It was an example of how write-in ballots can be lost and manipulated.
Oh, yeah, he just sent me an article about some state legislature that wants to redo the whole Fulton County legislator wants to dissolve and reconstitute the county election board ahead of the August runoff.
Which is
there you go, a Democrat-run county.
Yeah, and yeah, he wants to do that. He's a Democrat.
Yep.
But let me tell you something. There are a lot of laws that they have to change to do that.
Right. Which is why legislators
and
introducing.
It's great that he wants to do it. Fine. If you're a legislator, you see something wrong, you want to change it. But there's a lot of steps that have to take place to get that change in
First
place.
step would be introducing legislation.
And the fact of the matter is, these problems are from Democrat counties.
Oh, my God. And he places the blame on, who do you think?
Probably asked the Secretary of State.
Secretary of State.
Probably him.
Saying he didn't do enough to ensure the safe election. Not his job, Pete Fuller.
It's the county.
Not his job.
What is the Secretary of State
county election board job.
Well, there you go.
It's a bill to reconstitute the elections board because they didn't do their job. There are things the Secretary of State definitely did wrong. And those have been out there for a while. But this long clip and just ride this train because it's about to get off into way.
And they didn't do the training that he offered.
And that's the problem with not knowing the facts. Just throwing out information that you make up without researching it. It is not the Secretary of State's direct to protect the county vote. He administers it, but it's up to the county to secure that vote.
Yeah.
And the problems have been always falling in Democrat-run counties. I'm sure Republican-run counties have had problems. Just don't hear about it. They handle it. They keep it out of the press.
And how dumb is this? He's going to redo it August 1st. Oh, when they're doing early voting.
Yeah, you're going to reconstitute your election board.
I say all the time, don't know what.
They just don't know. And why would anybody want to reconstitute the entire board in the middle of an election?
Because they just failed badly.
In the middle of... Yeah,
so
it's runoff.
Is what a Democrat leadership does. They're confused. They don't know how to be leaders. They don't know state laws. And it shows. It shows in our county chair right there. by even stating the fact that why would a Democrat suppress a Democrat-run vote? We never said that.
No.
Never even, it was a Democrat-run county would take the zip codes of primarily conservative areas, and all of a sudden those votes disappear.
That is major fraud. There is no evidence that happened.
It could happen the same way, Pete.
No, it couldn't.
On the other side, a Republican-run county could all of a sudden, Democrat zip codes, those votes could disappear. We were just making an example of what could happen with mail-in votes.
So now this state representative
out of Fulton.
Out of Fulton, activists and commissioners have said they think the election failures rest with the election board in Fulton County, not with the Secretary of State.
Which is why
did you even read this article?
Yes, I did.
Not if the activists, the activists would say something like that it actually falls within the county and not the Secretary of State. So, at least they know what's going on.
Oh,
it wasn't an attack on the Secretary of State mostly. It was an attack on the poorly run elections in Fulton.
under his proposal, the House and the Senate delegation from Fulton County would be in charge of the chairperson.
Oh, how great was it? Let's really
more
meddle.
Power, yeah.
Let's really meddle in the county vote.
Strap
yeah,
in,
let
guys.
the state legislators meddle in the vote.
Woohoo, absolutely. That's what a great but Ron, that's the state-run party that the Democrats want. They want the state government and the federal government running everything. If you don't think like the state, you're obsolete. You're not needed. And this is what's happening. Let's put the state in charge of our elections. And they're starting it with that legislation in Fulton County.
Strap in. We're about to go to Nazi land.
Folks, you want to continue to see a communist state on the rise. This is what happens. This is it. They're going to get rid of it. Nazi Germany, we've said that many times before. One of the very first things done in the late 1930s that the Nazi... I just watched the six-part Hitler series on History Channel. And the very first thing they did was remove the guns from citizens and get rid of the police force. They defunded the police force in Germany and set up what they called their brown shirts, the SA. Okay, it then was just once Hitler and everybody got in power, the head of the SA, Hitler's very good friend, was lined up and shot, and the SA was taken over by the SS. That was, I believe, Himmler was in charge of the SS, if I'm not mistaken. Himmler was, and he was in charge of the SS, and they took over. That's what will happen. Once the communists, once the Democrats get into power, those people that help them get there are the first ones lined up and shot. They're useless at that point once they're in power. And men like Pete Fuller want this type of government in our country. And that's what Fulton County is trying to start right now.
Whoa! We just went from bad elections, we need to do something about the Fulton County Elections Board, to them processing on air, and apparently it fuzzed their brains. Craig goes straight into Nazi land. Conflates the communists and the Nazis, by the way, too. And then goes straight into people like Pete Fuller are going to want this government that's going to bring in people and help us get to power, but then we're going to turn around and shoot them. Whoa. Now, Craig, in listening to this 2 hours, he must have just really enjoyed this Hitler documentary he saw, because he's seeing everything in politics, everything ever, through the lens of World War II. Everything is not about World War II, Craig. There is a lot of things lessons we can learn. Nazis were bad. The Nazi ideology was bad. One of the main things that we don't like about Nazi ideology is the amount of racism that was in Nazi ideology, with the concentration camps and the treatment of the Jews. The killing of 6 million Jews was bad. And I am flabbergasted because these guys basically just took what was a very civil. They actually brought up the issue. I said, "Hey, we want to fix the issue," and we get called a Nazi. Now, there is something in internet culture called Godwin's Law, and that states once you invoke Hitler, you have lost whatever internet discussion you were engaged in. I'm going to invoke it here because, guys, I'm not a Nazi. I don't want anybody dead. I don't want anybody shot. And yeah, I don't want this to discourage anybody that wants to join in on the campaign here because I promise you, I'm not going to shoot you at the end of it. I don't want this. Oh, these guys are just insane like this. So, no. Oh, boy. Okay. What was so, was there another point I wanted to make in this? Not really. I think I ended up going back into like saying, what in the hell, guys? Why did you go there? I texted Ron that. And he kind of goes on like this with this Nazi thing for a while. Let's skip to another couple clips here. I've got some of these are. So I think this is where Ron decides to play gotcha. And what do you think about Antifada taking over a Seattle police department? I'm not an anarchist, Ron. And I guarantee you the people that are out there in a commune somewhere are not voting. Like, they have passed the whole we're going to participate in nice society here and have went straight into taking over police departments and setting up on communes. They have checked out. These are not activists that are going to be going and doing canvassing for us in the fall. I can guarantee you. So let's play a little bit of this.
And do you agree with that, Pete? And do you agree that all lives matter, or are you just a Black Lives Matter person?
Right.
Because I'm a person that believes everybody's life matters.
Right. And I know one thing, again, being Democrat, he doesn't believe that the life of unborn babies matters.
First of all, and Craig goes back and tries to save him here in a minute by going in and be like, "Oh, Ron, what you really meant to say was Black Lives Matter as well, but all lives matter, and that's not because you think that only." We'll get to that, and I'll try to make sure that gets played because I want Craig's save here to be there because. But it's obvious that both, in other clips I'm going to play here, that both him and Ron have some severe disconnects on what the whole Black Lives Matter hashtag movement means. And they keep repeating this whole all lives matter thing over and over again, trying to cover it up with, oh yeah, we also agree that Black Lives Matter. Nobody's saying that all lives don't matter. But what they're also betraying, particularly, and I'll play some other clips here in a bit, and actually I may save this for that, but they betray that they have no idea what the actual Black Lives Matter movement means. And they go on to try to refute. Let's just play the clip and we'll talk about it then. Let's see. Let's pop into this one.
Listen, folks, look it up. The statistics, Pete, look this up because you need to.
Mm-hmm.
There are more white people killed by police officers in this country than blacks.
That's right.
Look it up.
Well, here's
all lives matters. You know what? I went through my Facebook yesterday.
Yeah.
Anybody that had a thing up there say Black Lives Matter, I blocked them from my Facebook. I don't need them on my Facebook. I don't believe that. I believe all lives matter. I served in the military. Let me tell you something. I served with every race, color, and creed. Well, some of them were my leaders.
So, yeah, he gets into this whole thing with about whether or not...
if I'm not mistaken. Himmler was, yeah, and he was, that was, I believe...
yeah, Ron gets into this whole all lives matter bit. And starts yelling about like getting rid of anybody that had Black Lives Matter on their Facebook. and starts bringing up statistics, and they'll start bringing up a whole bunch of other statistics about Chicago here in a minute as well. As and starts talking about, oh, there are more white people killed by cops than blacks. Rebuttal here, first of all, is that when you look at proportion of the actual population, blacks tend to be shot by police at a much higher rate than white folks, because we got to remember that population wise, blacks make up less than 20%, I think, of the total population, but it's well higher amount of people shot. Second of all, more people being shot by police. Look, I've got friends, family that are in law enforcement. I know it is a hard job. It is an impossible job. It's much like teaching in some ways, where you're not given the resources for what you're asked to do. Especially when, as a society, have basically gotten rid of any support for people with mental health. We barely fund any sort of social safety net. And we then put officers out there in the field with 1,000 or so hours of training, equipped with a gun and a bunch of military surplus stuff, and tell them to go handle everything from a dispute between neighbors about if a ball went in their yard or not, all the way up to, oh God, there is a guy that has just killed 50 people in a high school or a nightclub or something. These are not the same jobs, but yet we equip and expect our police officers to do all of those jobs. They are very hard jobs. And they also don't, because of Republican budget cuts and an obsession with getting taxes down to a bare minimum, especially in Georgia, these jobs don't pay enough for that kind of uncertainty either. It's an impossible job, and you end up with situations that are impossible that end up bad. And you end up with people that doing things that, and you end up with people sometimes that don't belong in those jobs either. That are not, they don't have the right constitution to really handle themselves under stress in that situation. And a lot of times, and it builds up, and I'm sure, because I know that we have there are a lot of people in society that don't treat cops well right now, and a lot of that is because of issues that they've had with interactions in the past. And if you listen, and this is where Craig and Ron really need to sit and listen to what people around them are saying. And that's been a big part of like what this latest, since the George Floyd murder, when we've had on video now between Arbery and George Floyd, basically white people have been confronted with video evidence of what blacks have been telling us for decades is happening to them. And when you listen to stories of friends and neighbors tell their very young interactions with cops and how they are terrified when they have to talk to their kids about how exactly they need to act when pulled over, that's terrifying. This is an epidemic, and I've been heartened in some ways to see a lot of the white folks like myself finally getting it and finally listening. But then now we've got these two chuckleheads that basically are they're saying some of the right things here. They're saying they're agreeing that Black Lives Matter, but then wanting to go all race blind again and yell that no, all lives matter as well, which is just and race is an issue in this area. And let me say as well, Craig keeps bringing up, and others like, oh, Pete doesn't know his history. Pete doesn't do it. So I've got a master's in social science. I've got a degree in social science education, master's in instructional technology, but I'm a history guy. I would challenge Craig here, who apparently only knows history when it comes to the Nazis and World War II, to read some about the local history here. 2 counties over is Forsyth County. Forsyth County had a massacre in 1912 that forced every black resident there to leave after fabricated charges against young men that they had killed and raped a white woman, led to hangings there in a race massacre that basically forced every black resident out of that area. Forsyth County stayed that way until the mid 80s, up into the 90s even. Um, I have black friends that have confided they do not drive into North Georgia by themselves for the same reason. You had last year, no, this was this year. You had Dahlonega. You had a white supremacist basically try to have a. He actually had it. I think there was a massive police presence, but he had a. He was calling it a rally for Trump, and Ron knows this. Ron was actually saying, "Hey, don't go to this guy's stuff." Because it's actually a front for a white supremacist organization, but they were calling it a rally for Trump. Um, I was talking to a friend the other day, and we had the Klan marching in Jefferson in the 90s. We had the Christmas parade in Commerce that they had to cancel one year in the mid 80s, I believe, because the Klan put in a permit because they wanted to be in the Christmas parade. The city council then actually, which did include some black members, they were faced with the choice of having the Klan in the Christmas parade or canceling it, and they canceled it. And it's a beautiful story because that was some of the first integrated church services in the county. Was that Christmas in '85, basically in Commerce, because the congregations came together to have a joint service, basically to rebuke the Klan, which is awesome. That is beautiful, and I love that. I love those stories, and that's what I want actually broadcast. But instead, we get this: everybody's a Nazi, everybody's there, and at the same time, we can't fully move on until we accept what the past is right now, realize that we are not a colorblind society yet, and that there are issues that are still perpetuated here. What you'll hear if you listen to the old 2 hours, they'll go back into conflating the protest and the riots, basically saying they're the same thing. Then they'll back up and say, "Oh no, they're not the same thing." Because look, I went to three marches here, four protests here in Jackson County over the last few weeks, and I was heartened to see presence of our police force in Commerce, Jefferson, over in Preston. The sheriff was prominent at all these, and not just in a keeping an eye on things way, but as an active participant a lot of times. And I appreciate that, because I think that's an important symbol of what we do right here in Jackson County. I will make a big note that I did not see Representative Benton at any of these things. Actually, I've not seen or heard anything out of Representative Benton at all over the last few months. And you think that our representatives to state legislature would have some things to say, some things to share with his constituents. No, nothing at all. Yeah, but these were beautiful marches. But they did not come, and they were peaceful. They were completely peaceful. They were led by a lot of times by religious leaders or community activists. And you'll see, like in Jefferson and Commerce, where we have a substantial black population, they were black led, and they weren't just done just to tag along with everything. They were bringing up issues that still exist here, and I'm glad the police were part of it. But it wasn't. They weren't. They were also had something to say, and to just say, "Oh, it was peaceful, so therefore there's no issues here, and we should just pretend that all lives matter, and there's no issues with in the black community and in policing, and we should just all move on." That is not true, and you're not listening to the organizers of these protests, and you're not listening to the black voices in the community. And over on the west side of the county, the heartening thing there, it was for the most part white kids organizing it, white young college kids, and this is where someone on the far end of that spectrum, when it comes to Ron and Craig here, older elderly white guys, they seem to have a mirror opposite view of what's going on from our youth are white youth in the area who actually do see the issues, who are listening to their black friends and want to support them. And that's in this this is where they keep complaining. Oh, it's not Black Lives Matter. Yes, all lives matter, and Black Lives Matter just as much as everyone else's. And this is what Ron and them don't seem to get, but our youth seem to get. I get this. Everybody on the spectrum, and unless you're out to divide people like this radio show with these two guys out there just spewing misinformation out and just spewing hatred and spewing this idea that anybody that agrees with them or doesn't agree with them is some sort of Nazi. Literally, that's what they're saying. It's just not right. All right, let's skip on over to this clip here. I'm actually not even sure which one this is. We'll listen because I marked it to play for some reason. Let's see.
You know, the best thing that could happen to this country
Oh, yeah.
is we become all Republican Senate, all Republican House,
Yep.
and Donald Trump. Because I believe with Donald Trump, we'll actually get something done.
Right.
And the McCains and them are gone.
Right.
So I believe
The Romneys.
Romney isn't gone, but he'll be outvoted.
He'll be outvoted, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he crossed over and be outvoted.
Yeah.
So after being told that all I wanted was to shoot everybody that wasn't agreeing with me, best thing to happen with the country is just to get rid of these guys. Let's skip on to the end one here. I think that one had some other things I wanted to point out, but I don't see what the notes were. So this is already touching on 40 minutes. Let's talk about this last clip here, and then we'll have some closing thoughts. And but yeah,
This one won't be rebroadcast.
I am so tired of white guilt. It isn't funny.
Yeah.
None of my ancestors, none, zero. I don't know if you can say that, Pete, because you grew up in the South.
Well, probably not, no.
None of my ancestors owned slaves.
Right.
all right. This idea of white guilt being well, first of all,
Lives matters.
hang on, Ron. I grew up in the South. I was born in Coffee County, Georgia. You get on 441 and drive for 200 miles south of here. You will drive right by Coffee Regional Medical Center. It used to be Coffee Regional Hospital, where I was born. My folks, though, my mother, her side is basically first or second generation German. I believe they came over in the 1880s, but I'm not really sure because our genealogy has not been all that great in the Fuller family or the Rosses, turned out. Dad's family was all up in northern North Carolina, Appalachia area. And I know actually that area was not exactly, they weren't racially tolerant at all, but were not a lot of slaves in that area. It wasn't great farming for the type of farms that utilized slavery a good bit. But I don't really know. But I like the way that Ron just throws out there, either you're not even from the South, or your family is complicit in this, and this idea of white guilt. There's nothing I'm doing about white guilt. It's because I understand history. And I listen to my friends, and I read. And what Ron seems to be missing through this is like, I struggled my whole life, and I got where I was, and these people ought to be doing the same thing. Well, and this gets into the concept of privilege, which I'm sure Ron is completely unaware or wants to misconflate as well. I didn't grow up rich either. I grew up in a little brick ranch down in South Georgia. My dad was in the Army for 20 years, retired, then got on with Ryder Truck Rental, and that's when they actually moved down to South Georgia with them. Dad was a diesel mechanic. We were not rich. I'm very lucky and privileged that I never was hungry a day in my life. We always had a house. We always had a place to be. There was never any of the struggles like that, which makes me extremely privileged as I got older and realized that was how rare that tends to be. And how many of my friends did have those times. What I also didn't have to deal with was any of the issues. I've been able to go into stores my entire life, and as far as I know, I've never been followed around to make sure I wouldn't steal anything. My name, Pete Fuller, it sounds about as white as it can be. And I believe my resumes have always been read as such. That's not been an issue that anybody else has had to look at and be like, oh, we're going to toss that one out. And we saw this just last year and hushed it. And Ron was there, saw it. And yet he's going to completely whiff on this idea that that still exists. Because Mr. Keith Henry, who was the applicant in Houston, made it through a lot of reviews of resumes, got to the final four, and it wasn't until after he had a phone interview with Teresa over there, the mayor, that his resume went over into the bin. I've spoken to Mr. Henry on the phone, and you can from speaking to him, he is a very, very well spoken guy, but you can tell he's black. And that's not a knock on him at all. And that's where I believe why his resume found the bin after that phone interview, because Teresa figured that out and didn't know beforehand. But and that's just my theory, but that's what I think happened. Anyway, Ron knows this. Ron knows that happened, and yet he's going to. That is an example right here in 2019. That was 2020 is still going on of white privilege. That these other guys, their resumes found it right thrown through, and Mr. Henry's did not. And when you look at the history of this county, that's absolutely the case, all over the place. So yeah, that's so we got Ron here, upset about white guilt. Let's keep on playing this, because there was some other things said here that just really blew my mind.
Nor did 95% plus of white Americans during those years of slavery.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't own slaves. Most of us, second generation,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Yeah.
So,
What?
whether or not you own slaves or not, this country was built in so many cases on the backs of slaves, especially in the South.
White Republicans died in the Civil War to free slaves.
Mm-hmm.
White Republicans voted unanimously to free slaves.
Correct.
Later voted to give them citizenship and voting rights. Democrats fought against all three of these amendments.
In huge percentages, 98% of Democrats voted to keep slaves on the plantations.
The Democratic Party and the Republican Party of the 1860s are very different animals than they are today. Let's keep that in mind.
Exactly.
It was huge, the number that did not want to free the slaves. Democrats.
I know.
Abraham Lincoln, Republican. Freed the slaves. The first 23, I thought it was like a dozen, the first 23 black congressmen, senators, politicians were Republicans. Republicans.
So this is where Craig also needs to go back and read his history. So right after the end of the Civil War, yes, we had an outflow of black legislators at the federal level coming from the South, freed slaves who served. Why did that not continue, Craig? This is where I need you to go back and read your history instead of telling me I don't know what I'm talking about, all right? When you look at what happened, you had the rise of the Klan, you had the rise of different white terrorist organizations that went through and burned, pillaged, and scared the crap and killed. These were terrorists that killed and maimed and scared the black population back into their role in society, that the white Confederates that were fresh off getting their butts kicked came down and tried to reestablish control over the South. That's what happened. Okay, Craig? You had the rise of Jim Crow. You had the voting rights of these people stripped by these same white Democrats, yes, because there was no Republican Party in the South. You had a strain of white conservatives at that time. Let's be clear here. The Conservative Party in the South from the 1860s through the 1970s was the Democratic Party. Yes. Guess what? They all flipped by the 90s. The Conservative Party went to be the Republican Party, and we were left with basically no Democratic Party in a lot of cases. That happened here. in Jackson County, the Democratic Party here died in 1996 and wasn't restarted until 2008 because all the Republicans, all the conservative Democrats went to go be Republicans. All right, there's your history. Oh, catch this little tidbit. This is hilarious.
Find that truth.
Abraham Lincoln is the one who financed or caused the government to finance the building of almost 90% of the Confederate memorials in the South, but as a way of fostering goodwill.
All right, the producer or something throws in this little historical tidbit, which is freaking hilarious. Said Abraham's government is the one that funded almost all the Confederate memorials in the South to foster goodwill. Lincoln was assassinated like a week after the Civil War ended. His first order of business was not getting Confederate memorials funded in the South. Good God, man! Are you telling me I don't know history? And you're going to say that? Second of all, you saw the big wave of Confederate memorials go into areas all over the South in the 1910s and 20s. What was happening during that same time? The rise of the Second Klan, the rise of Jim Crow laws all over the South, the reestablishment of the strict segregational codes that basically removed blacks from public service in society for another 50 years. That's when these were put in place, and these were monuments basically to Confederate. So, I get that honoring your war dead, and I get their service and sacrifice, but these poor guys got tricked into going and fighting a war basically to perpetuate white slave owners and their plantation system so they could stay rich. That's who benefited from the Civil War, and that's what we need to make sure that we tell people is don't get caught trying to in this whole idea that the South just wanted to. The lost cause is real. The lost cause narrative, and basically the building of civil. I read a very interesting quote this morning, basically saying that memory of society is constructed. In the United Daughters of the Confederacy and whatnot, and Southern Confederate veterans and others did a great job of basically creating a new memory for the South that was not what actually happened, which this guy apparently is bought straight into. And Craig here apparently can skip right from the end of the Lincoln administration straight to 1990 without missing the entire 20th century and what happened between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party.
There you go. And if you weren't able to hear that, Rob was saying that Abraham Lincoln, it was his government that funded most of the Confederate monuments that are being torn down today as a reminder of their heroics. And again, a reminder of the fact that that's part of our heritage. That's part of our history. Learn from it. Don't destroy it. My mother, years and years and years.
Oh, God. This story. Okay. Yeah. So this is renowned Nazi and German World War II historian Craig Fisher here giving us a lesson on how the Germans treat their history and why they're treating it wrong.
Years and years ago, with another friend of hers, took a river cruise through Germany. And I just said, it would be fun if you would buy me a copy of Mein Kampf, which is the book that Adolf Hitler wrote when he was in prison in Germany in the late 20s, early 30s.
He sent his mother to Germany to get a copy of Mein Kampf.
And I've heard about it. I've read excerpts from it. I've never read the whole book. As from a history standpoint, I would have loved to have read the whole book. When she went into a handful of bookstores along the route that she was on, they never heard, or the story they told her, they've never heard of that book, and they never heard of a man named Adolf Hitler in Germany.
Craig Fisher sent his elderly mother, I guess, to Germany to get him a copy of Mein Kampf. The Germans don't just sell Mein Kampf in the bookstores there. And of course they've heard of Hitler. They just didn't want to deal with an idiot American going and trying to find... Apparently, this is the one thing he knows about Germany, is that they had Nazis there, and he wanted a copy of Mein Kampf from Germany. No, the Germans remember World War II very much. You know what they remember? They had to spend the last age 60, 70 years, basically dealing with the repercussions of what they as a country did. What you see all over Germany are not statues to Hitler and their war dead. I'm sure that there are cemeteries and people do honor the soldiers that fought in World War II that were German, that were in their personal families. But what you also see is memorial after memorial to the Jews that died there, outside of Jewish houses that were confiscated and taken by the Nazis after the Jews were taken to the camps. The Germans have put memorial, like little stones that basically say who had lived there. The Germans absolutely know the Holocaust exists. It's us that want to, and the neo-Nazis that say it doesn't exist, but the Germans have very much made a huge effort to denazify their area. And I want to posit this to Craig here. Listen, if the Confederacy had won, going into World War II, would they have been an Axis power? Because when you look at the ideology of Nazi Germany, the ideology of the Confederacy, especially surrounding racial supremacy, the Nazis knew about the Confederacy. The Nazis used the same language and studied the thought process of the Confederacy. If you're going to have Nazis in Georgia, basically they would have been Confederates, and you see this in the neo-Nazis and using the battle flag and whatnot in what the neo-Nazis in the U.S. do. So don't ever lecture me about history, Craig Fisher.
Okay? They don't believe the Holocaust happened in Germany. That never happened. This is what the Democrats want from our history. Let's erase it and forget it and not learn from it.
So again, don't listen to this show yourself. These people are idiots. And if you're going to tell me I don't know history, Craig Fisher, bye. I'm done with you. And yeah, I'm not going on this show anymore because these guys are idiots. And if they're going to call me a Nazi, and Craig has seen two documentaries on Hitler, and apparently and that is everything it is, I'm done with you. This is nonsense.